everybody, and welcome to today's webcast sponsored by Zoomerang and PR Newswire. My name is Sarah Skerrick, and I'm going to be moderating today's session, Staying Top of Mind Through Creative Content Generation. For those of you who are active Twitterers, you can follow along using the hashtag ContentGen. You can also submit questions through Twitter. If Twitter is not your cup of tea, you can also submit questions right on the dashboard that you're viewing this webinar through. Look on the lower left-hand side. You'll see a text box where you can enter a question for the speakers. With us today are Douglas Carr, who is the CEO of Douglas Carr New Media, and you can follow him on Twitter at Douglas Carr, as well as John O'Connell, the Senior Public Relations Manager for HTNB. Now, some of you may be wondering, what does PR Newswire and Zoomerang, what are we doing together? Well, the fact of the matter is we've recently unveiled a partnership that enables Zoomerang users to access content distribution and educational resources at their fingertips, provided by PR Newswire. So what does PR and content distribution have to do with surveys? Well, as you're going to find through our speakers today, the answer is quite a lot. There's some really interesting ways you can use polls and survey data to create some really interesting content that will engage your audiences and really help power your PR and social media marketing campaigns. I should also add that you can follow Zoomerang on Twitter under the account at Zoomerang. Likewise, PR Newswire can be followed at PR Newswire. Once again, the hashtag for today's conversation is ContentGen. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand the reins over to Douglas, who is going to start us off. Then John will follow up, and at the end of the session, we will have Q&A. So please do go ahead and submit your questions as they occur to you throughout the session. We've left plenty of time to pick them up at the end of the session. So Doug, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. This is just an amazing opportunity. I'm so thankful to be with PR Newswire and Zoomerang and John from HNTB on this webcast. I think content generation, what we're finding with our clients is definitely the toughest part of this entire equation, and that's so we've got Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and blogs and white papers and case studies and all of this stuff that we have to produce on a day-to-day basis. And every company is becoming a content producer. We're all becoming publishers in our own right. And it's how we build authority online with our visitors. One of the things that I try to explain to people a lot is the reason why you want to take each one of these discrete strategies is because you have to work with different visitor intent on your website. So your visitor to your website, they may be anywhere between considering a purchase or doing an impulse purchase. So everything in between matters, whether you're blogging and creating authority, whether you're doing public relations and trying to get word of mouth over to influencers and leaders in traditional media, whether you're doing email marketing to retain and upsell your clients, whether you're working on your website, white paper, case studies, as I said, all of those things before. So what we have to do is we have to create a constant pace content throughout all of these, and we have to use each of these different tactics to basically start attracting and bring people into the funnel to bring them to our company and do business with them. So the first thing I tell people is to stop selling. Your job when you're creating content isn't to sell people. Your job is to provide value to them, and there's a huge difference in between. Even if you're putting out a discount coupon, you're providing value. You're not necessarily selling. But the biggest mistake that I see people make with their content online is that they're constantly trying to push and push and push into a sale. People don't want to be pushed into a sale. They want to be provided value. They want you to capture their attention, and they want to build authority and trust with you. So those are the things that we continue to ping on with our clients. And what we determine what people want versus what they really want is significantly different. And this is actually the results of the Zoomerang poll, where small and medium-sized businesses were asked how they wanted to be talked to by businesses. And the interesting thing was that consumers actually said that they loved email and newsletters and websites, and companies said that they want to do company websites, email, and social media. So there's definitely a difference in between what our expectations of how our content is going to perform and what our consumers actually want to be fed. And that's in and of itself the most important aspect of our content generation, is we want to absolutely feed the senses. So we have people that are demanding, they're hungry, they want content, they want help with their product, they want help with whatever they're doing. If it's B2B, they may need help with a platform or a service. If they're B2C, it may be a product that's going to help them at home, or an industry, or a charity even, or a nonprofit that's going to help them get to some new level. So we talk to people a lot about that content needs to feed the senses. Not everybody reads websites, believe it or not. I'm a huge proponent of blogging. I've been blogging for a long time, and I tend to always fall back on words on a page to communicate with people. The problem with that is that some people simply don't read anymore. The web has turned into this incredible multimedia and interactive medium for people, and it's not just about writing. It's also about talking, and it's also about videos so that people can see us, and it's also about kinesthetic reaction. So if you have tools on your website and if you have ways to interact with them, like, for example, a survey. So one of the things that we do with our own blog is we do a survey of the week. We do a poll. It's simple. We try to think of something that's newsworthy or something that's industry, something that's going to grab people's attention and going to spread like wildfire. And we do a poll of the week. And this winds up turning into 3 or 4 different posts for us on a weekly basis. We have one post where we just release the survey. And then we have another post where we analyze the survey results. And if the survey results are great enough, we might turn this into a much bigger experiment and take that to a new level. The great thing about this is we're not just pushing content. We're actually pulling information and needs from the people visiting our website and then feeding those needs. The next thing that we do is we repurpose content like crazy, and this is something that we honestly don't see happening enough to our clients. Because you're on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and you have a webinar and you have a radio show, you shouldn't be afraid of releasing the same content in multiple formats in multiple different mediums. So this is a great example where we took survey results. We actually did this with Zoomerang. We took survey results of that medium-sized business survey, and Zoomerang wrote this incredible white paper on it. Well, we took that white paper and we turned it into an infographic. That infographic wound up getting all over the web, and we'll show some examples of how that spread later. But we wrote blog posts about it. And then, of course, right now we're doing a webinar on content creation, which is ultimately, part of that relationship that came from that survey. So it's important for you to remember that it's okay to take the same content, the same ideals, and provide impact a number of different ways through a number of different mediums. You don't want to just regurgitate and repeat everything over and over and over and syndicate it through each one. But each medium provides an opportunity to get feedback, and each medium provides a different path for people to come back to your website and actually do business with you. When you take advantage of those mediums, you're not going to hit the same audience over and over and over. Or if you do hit some of the same audience, you're going to be describing things a little bit differently and helping them to understand the content better. The reason why we want to do this is because of social sharing. Social sharing is the dominant way for people to actually share and promote things online. So this is a great example where someone did an analysis of of where the social shares were coming from, how people were learning about information. They're learning about it through all these different mediums. Facebook right now being on top, email, Twitter, Yahoo, even, you know, down there is MySpace, Dig, Delicious. We love StumbleUpon. That's one of the ones that we use. And all of these different mediums are a way to get your content out there. When we're pushing content to our audience, one of the big things that we're trying to do is we're trying to start a fire. We want to spark something. It's not just the final step in this process isn't to click publish. The final step in this process is nonstop promotion of that content that we worked so hard to create. So we want to do things like create infographics. Infographics are just incredible means of information out there because it's simple, it's in a single file, it's in a single image. That image can be copied from site to site to site. And it's great from an SEO standpoint because each time someone promotes your infographic, they typically link back to your site. So infographics are aesthetically pleasing. They're informational, so you get to combine a lot of information at the same time. They're always unique somehow. You have resources on them so that people can go and do additional research on the topic. And typically an infographic is displayed with an embed code so that you can then copy that and paste that on your site so that you can share it with your audience. And so infographics wind up being this incredible, you know, piece of information that shares wildly. This is the infographic. We did an infographic along with Zoomerang on marketing in a digital world, and it wound up being a blog post on Zoomerang, the marketing technology blog, a personal blog. It was a press release that was distributed about it. Our company blog, we wrote about it. And so we wound up reaching all of these different audiences with a single piece of content. And that single piece of content was from a white paper. And that white paper was from a poll or a survey that we received from other people. The results are startling when you take advantage of these. When you put them out, when you put even a blog post or an infographic or a white paper out, the next step is to promote. So we put out press releases. We monitor with social media to see what influencers might be interested in it, and we push it to them. We tend to create a landing page associated with it so that we can track people coming back and see what the response rates were. And we even go out and we pitch influencers out there on the market. If we know someone's in our industry and they have leverage, we'll go ask them, you know, do you want an infographic? So sites like Mashable and TechCrunch and things like that in our industry, we'll go push it. We have our PR firm utilizes tools like PR Newswire to distribute the information. And influencers then pick that information up and they tend to publish it as well. I talked about social sharing and I wanted to show one example of this. This is 1 week on the Marketing Tech blog showing you what StumbleUpon brings us from a visitor standpoint. So this is 2,500 plus visitors that we get simply from one medium within social. That's one sliver of the traffic that we get. And that's where I want to show this is so powerful. I think people are always looking for the, you know, the golden, you know, the mother of all tools to share their information with. There's not one. It's important for you to understand that each of these mediums have their own audience and have people that appreciate and like them. So StumbleUpon is one of these unique ones that there's a great audience there. And when they start sharing on there and they start stumbling, they tend to lean towards things of relevance. And so you wind up getting a great audience on board that's relevant to the information that you're putting out. And don't underestimate the amount of promotion that you can do through these mediums. The last thing I want to talk about is absolutely you should be re-releasing information. So we had an incredible infographic that was built by another company called FormStack, and they did a landing page optimization tool. and it was basically how to build a landing page using best practices. And 6 months later, we re-released the infographic, and it got just as many visits as it did that first time. Now, was it duplicate visits? No, this was an entirely new audience that it was hitting. So don't let that old content just sit there and get stale. You've written incredible posts, re-release that post. Put it out in a white paper format. Adjust it to, if it's a white paper, then do case studies. If it's case studies, then do an infographic. If it's an infographic, then do a blog post. But definitely don't just sit and let your content dry up and die like everybody seems to do, especially with blogs. Put it out over and over again. The thing is we have an audience right here. I think we have 1,600 people registered for this webinar. You guys are hungry for how to create content. I've written about how to create content, dozens, if not hundreds of, well, probably thousands of times. But people are continuously hungry for more of that information. So I tend to repeat myself over and over, and I continue to put out the same tips and the same information. And you know what? The value of that information has not changed. And I think that's what people mistake is they think just because they put it out before, if they put it out again, it's of less value. It's not. We need constant reminders and constant help with what we're doing. So definitely go out there and re-release it again. If you want more information, there's a ton of information here. I'm not going to go into this slide, but reach me with Douglas Carr and the Marketing Technology blog. I wrote Corporate Blogging for Dummies, and I think we have 100 different blog post ideas on there. You can do a search for 200 blog post ideas on the web and get that. But most of all, find out what your users are looking for and feed them. And the difference between that is, notoriously, we've always gone and just created what we think people want. Now, with tools like Zoomerang, you can take and actually find out what your audience wants, and you can distribute it. So I'm going to turn it over to John. John's got an incredible presentation that really gets into some nuts and bolts and use cases. John, I'm excited to see your slide deck, and I'm going to go ahead and sign off.
Well, thanks, Doug. That was a great overview. And thanks again to PR Newswire and Zoomerang for putting this together. Appreciate everyone taking the time out to speak with us today. As Doug said, I've got some specific use examples for you to go over from HNTB. We are an architectural engineering company. We work on transportation projects, stadiums, arenas, airports, all across the country. And so you probably have driven on by, under, through, or over something that we've worked on. But we have primarily a business-to-business audience, and publicity polls really are an opportunity for us to share our priorities, our key messages with our audiences. This works not only in a consumer environment, but in a B2B environment too. And if you take nothing else away from my presentation, I hope you'll do that this is something that works for many, many different types of organizations. We've called this survey series America Thinks. Bottom line, it really is a publicity poll. It's a tool that we're using. Even though we are a large organization, we do not have a significant ad budget. In fact, many of our competitors put a lot of time and energy into advertising. We've chosen to focus on earned content, and we know with our relationships with the media, as well as the general public and the audiences we care about, that numbers matter. If you're able to put information in a new format, in a new way, then that allows us to tell our story. And as Doug was just saying, we can leverage those findings in many, many different types of formats and channels. So we want to be able to demonstrate our knowledge, but I also want to stress this is not marketing research per se. It goes a little bit beyond, say, an internet poll that we might conduct ourselves, and we've looked at doing that as well with some of our audiences. But it is not a political poll. It is not market research. It doesn't go into that much granular detail. But what it does do, and that what we want to have happen, is that it generates some discussions, not only with us and, say, the media, or us and some audiences that may be reading a white paper or a news release, but with our frontline staff and their clients and their prospects as they go out to win new business, that new road project, that new interchange, that new arena. One other thing I want to stress about this is that a lot of our projects we allow our clients to talk about primarily. So as a consultant to a consultant, sometimes it can be tough to find new news to talk about. So these surveys are allowing us to create something that we own outside of a specific project or a specific geographic region. It also allows us to demonstrate the firm's really smart people on issues that matter not just to our firm, but to the country. You may be following some of the discussions right now about how are we going to pay for our roads and bridges in the future. Well, this allows us to tap into the frustration that many people feel about congestion, about deteriorating roads and bridges, and bring our perspective to that discussion. It also gives us another reason to talk to our media partners on a regular basis. So we can create an editorial calendar at the beginning of the year, and we'll shoot for about 12 surveys a month, but oftentimes it's less than that. We really only want to go out when we know we have something in mind that's going to be valuable for us, for the media, and for our audiences. And we do, again, share that through multiple channels. We will definitely send out a wire service release. We will post information on our website. In the past, we've done some animation around some of the USA Today style graphics that we've created and put that up on YouTube. We'll push it out via some direct messages to our contacts, and we'll continue to feed that discussion on an ongoing basis. And I can talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. One other thing that I'll stress before I get into some specific examples that I'd like to share with you is that when we talk about what we're going to do with our surveys, we really do try to figure out topics that are going to be timely, that are going to be newsworthy, and that are going to create those discussions that we shoot for. So for us, we really look at the strategic plan of the company as well as the news of the day to try to find that sweet spot. And it can be things like reducing congestion and improving safety, or how we're going to pay for all the stuff that has to be built. We've also done some research in the past about technology and how that may change how we drive and what we drive in the future, and this whole idea of green infrastructure. You know, how will our infrastructure contribute to our environment rather than damaging it? So those are all things that we consider when we're doing our surveys. So a couple of examples I thought I'd share with you, and I think hopefully that decision-making process, you can see that kind of working behind the scenes. Here are some results that we shared around high-speed rail. And we knew going into last year, for example, that high-speed rail was going to be a major push by the Obama administration, by the U.S. Department of Transportation. We actually are working on many of the high-speed rail and incremental high-speed rail projects that are going on across the country, and there's some real demand for it among the general public. So here's a way that we could talk about the work that we do and the fact that there is a need for it as the national debate is going on, by providing some numbers that nobody else has. As I said, we also do a lot of work with airports. And that GPS that works in your car, that's not how planes determine where they're going to go right now. They're still using World War II era radar data. So we were trying to find out how does the general public feel about such a transition, and will they like that? And then that allows us to talk about some of the implications for airports. If you're going to have more planes in the air, you're going to have more capacity on the ground at the airports via gates and runways in the future. We also do a lot of work in the toll sector, and if we're not going to raise the gas tax in this country, how are we going to pay for our roads and bridges? Well, tolls are one way to do that, and in fact, we found that if given a choice between new roads, no new road funded by a gas tax, no new roads, or roads funded by new tolls, people definitely prefer the toll option or no new roads over the gas tax. So tolls are a welcome addition, a welcome option for how we can pay for our roads, and most people prefer that. So we've actually asked that question a couple of different ways, several times. Again, as Doug said, to extend that story, we also have a series of white papers, not only on what's changed in tolling in the last 50 to 60 years in terms of the technology, but where the United States is already exploring tolling on interstates and how DOTs can make that happen. We've looked at transit, and I hope what you can also see through these is we're not what you would call an informal company. We're a professional firm. We're a consultant. We want to maintain a certain degree of seriousness in the materials, but we also have kind of a look that we're trying to go for that's a touch playful, but also quickly gives people a sense for what the survey findings are. And so that's really what we're shooting for, that USA Today style, but we've made it our own, and we've actually been very fortunate. USA Today has actually picked up some of our surveys, but of course they've redone them in their own style. We've also had a number of trade publications that have posted this information verbatim on their own sites, so we've given them both options. Here's some more examples of sustainability. We also do some work in the water sector, so here are some things related to flooding that we've done in the past, and again, some infrastructure-related issues in terms of not only flooding, but if people are ready to use things like public transportation. And also here's another one on funding. Again, I think I mentioned, whoops, excuse me. I think I mentioned we will ask these questions in different ways. This is a way that we've asked that kind of gas tax tolling type question in the past, and again, it kind of depends on the audience and what we're shooting for. But there are, if there are different channels and different tools to use, there are different ways to ask a question. So that's always important to keep in mind as well. A couple of specific examples of ways that we've extended this story. We'll do some direct correspondence, encourage direct correspondence by client service leaders with elected officials, both locally and nationally. We'll pitch story ideas to our media partners, and we'll use the survey results as evidence of why that would be an interesting story. We'll use our survey findings in op-eds and viewpoints that we create, and also cite them as evidence, for example, in interviews, whether it be with a local TV station related to a project with frontline staff, or our CEO with Fox Business. Typically, we try to limit the amount of time that we use these. USA Today, some of the major national outlets really do require that these surveys be scientifically valid. So that's one of the reasons why we use a third party. But they also can get dated. So typically, we'll share these results in different formats about a year. As they get a little older, we kind of put them on the shelf, or even think about re-asking questions. We've asked, for example, transit tolling and high-speed rail questions over the course of several years, so we can actually track the change, but we don't want to make them sound fresh when they're not. We also share this information internally because we do want to arm our frontline staff with this information as it becomes interesting and valuable, so to them and to the people they work with. So that's really what we wanted to share with you about our America Thinks survey series. Happy to answer any questions, and also we'll tweet a couple of additional links to some examples of where we've used this in our publications, and via video as well, if you'd be interested in looking at those after we're finished. Thank you.
Fantastic. And everyone, if you have just joined in, you can follow the conversation on Twitter at the hashtag #ContentGen, and you can follow our speakers. Here is a follow-up slide with everyone's Twitter handles. Well, we do have some questions from the audience fellows, so we're going to go straight into those. We have one kind of bashful question asking for a definition of what is an infographic. So could you guys talk about that a little bit for us?
Sure. So basically an infographic is nothing more than a really, really cool image. and to put it bluntly, that's it. So when you're collecting a lot of data from people and a lot of information from people, it's hard to write out all of that information and make it easily consumable so that people understand. So if one of the examples that I wrote in the answers to everybody was if you go to marketingtechblog.com/infographics, what you'll see is an array of these single image files that have a ton of charts and information and everything from, there's a company out there called, and you guys have to look this one up, HCCMIS. They do a zombie survival guide. If you do a search for a zombie survival guide, they basically built an infographic on how to survive if you're a zombie or if there's zombies around. But basically, it's an easily consumable image file that could be distributed. So you could just grab that image, either in an image format or a PDF, and you can send it by email. You can repost it on other blogs. And it's a lot easier than you can imagine, copying a bunch of text and sharing that, or trying to understand what the clear image is. If I described, the economic stats for the United States right now in words, it would be tough to understand. But if I actually put out a series of charts on an image file that displayed it, that would be an infographic. So it's an informative graphic.
I think that's a great definition. And one thing, and I'd like you guys to weigh in on it, is we actually have quite a few questions about what's an infographic and how do I create one. I've used something as similar as just, kind of ham-fistedly putting together a Venn diagram in PowerPoint and then using that as an infographic in a blog post, or actually we used a couple of them to illustrate an ebook that we published as well. What are some other tools that you might recommend for, kind of quick and easy ways to develop infographics for the rest of us who may not have a high-powered graphics team at our fingertips?
Well, I will say sometimes a couple of quick things. One is don't be afraid to find a freelance graphic designer that you trust, because sometimes these things may be a little bit beyond. I'm tend to be a word guy, a media guy, so I don't know that I could do this by myself. But what I will say, if you're going to attempt it, or if you're going to hire a freelancer, have something in mind. Look for some of these examples that Doug is talking about and share that with your designer, or have those in front of you when you're trying to create them, because infographics can cover a really wide spectrum. When we started, I think even our graphic designers were scratching their head trying to say, okay, what are these things? And what I said was, here, let's grab a copy of USA Today. And in the front of any section, you're going to see down on probably below the fold on the left-hand side what's called a snapshot. And they will take survey data from around the country, around the world, from different parties, and they will boil that down, or one of those stats, or two or three of those stats, down to one compelling image. And that really is the key here. People tend to learn more effectively, better, particularly with the web now and how much access people have with visuals. So we'll issue a release and we'll try to explain the content, but if we can get some of those key concepts down to several visuals, that will be really helpful. The other thing I will say about that is that even though we have a graphic design staff, we're very pressed for time. So we don't try to do all of the survey visually. What we'll do is we'll say, here, what are the 2 or 3 key findings, and try to represent those visually and use those to help tell our story. I hope that helps answer the question.
Sure
yeah, and I think, obviously Excel is a great tool for creating charts, and if you're doing Zoomerang surveys and polls, you can simply export a graphic. You guys have on Zoomerang, there's like 20 different, themes and styles for your charts to put out there. So it's very easy to just export that and then put together a nice graphic that encompasses all of those charts and everything and distribute it.
That's a really good point. We could also say that infographic is a really fancy way to say pretty colored chart or table. So good advice, both of you. Thank you. So next question, we've got both of you mentioned throughout your presentations, obviously, that you're surveying, your audiences. We have a couple questions about who are you surveying? Are you surveying just audiences over and over, or I'm sorry, just a set of clients over and over, or do you survey a new group of people, and if so, how do you do that?
Well, I can answer that question for our America Thinks program. More broadly, we've considered doing some online surveys, and we've done some surveys of our employees. In fact, at one time, this was several years ago, so my history is a little fuzzy, but I believe we actually kind of compared some of our employee responses to some of the national responses. So that's an option. But what we're doing with America Thinks is we are scientifically getting a random sample of U.S. citizens age 18 and older, and that's being conducted by a third-party vendor online, and typically, traditionally, those were done by phone, but you can do them online now because we know they can test out the demographics and know if they have a representative sample or not. So typically, to get a sound sample, you're going to have to question about 1,000 people nationwide to get an average American response. So that's who we're asking. It's different people every time, and it's anonymous, so we don't know who these people are. Typically, they're closed types of questions. You ask the question, several different responses. Occasionally we'll ask an open-ended question, but that gets kind of tough in terms of trying to net out, for example, a graphic or a quick set of findings. Really, it's I strongly agree, I somewhat agree, I somewhat disagree, or I strongly disagree. It's those types of questions.
Great.
I'd say that ours is a little bit different methodology, that we try to trickle out one question polls as much as we can, and then we gather, that series of information. So we'll absolutely poll customers versus prospects to find out, obviously with customers, we want to find out, where their pain points are and how we can help, either retain them, through better customer service, or, upsell them through additional services. And then for prospects, of course, which is a primary acquisition method for us with our blog, is we constantly have a constant trickle of polls out there, quick, concise, so that a visitor doesn't feel overwhelmed by a 30-page, survey. And we gather that information a little piece at a time, and then over time we improve, the content that we're writing based on that feedback.
Okay, so you actually just segued into another question we just received, Douglas, about balancing the number of questions you ask per survey, and you just advocated doing literally a one-question poll at a time and then aggregating those results. John, does your company do the larger surveys, or are yours also quite short?
We have the option of doing either. Typically, what we have found the last few years in the context of the America Thinks campaign is that asking 3 to 5, at most 10 questions, what we call omnibus-style questions, seems to be the right number for us to be able to have enough significant results related to our strategic outreach to tell a story about a particular industry or trend. We've also done up to 20 questions. We also did, I think, a 30-question survey for California State related to its water resource issues. Those are a little bit more rare. Typically, they're, rather than say about bridge infrastructure, they would be on infrastructure priorities and infrastructure spending overall. We also have the option to ask, just like Doug, 1 or 2 questions on a pressing newsworthy subject. So we can quickly turn these around in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, if we're really pressed for just a couple of quick questions. But typically we're in the 5-10 question range.
Okay, great. And John, you just did it too. You just segued nicely into another question, which was kind of related to an earlier question about who do you survey, but then it's how are you issuing these polls? Do you put them in emails? Do you put them on your blog, on your website, on social media, all of the above, none of the above?
Absolutely. Well, with America Thinks, absolutely. Much to Doug's point earlier, we want to issue. Now, I hear that question 2 different ways. When we're announcing results, we're going to push it out in a variety of different formats. For example, we asked some questions related to interstates and what the U.S. DOT calls its Corridors of the Future program. We had a news release. Our official Twitter feed, HNTB Corp, blogged about it. We had a recent issue of what we call Think Magazine, which is more broadly related to thinking about infrastructure issues, and there was a story about that survey in there. There is a dedicated web page on our website, hntb.com/AmericaThinks, which acts as an archive for our old survey research. So there are a lot of different ways that we share that information. Now, when the surveys are being conducted with our third party, that's typically an email and website style invitation, which then people then respond to.
Great. Doug, how about you in terms of distributing the polls?
Everywhere. I mean it. I think John hit the nail on the head. Is our audiences are splintered now. Some people love Facebook, some people love Twitter, some people love coming to our site. Some people only, we talk to via email. So when we put out a poll or we put out a survey and we're trying to collect information from our entire audience, we will absolutely, put it through all of those different mediums to try to collect that information.
This just sparked another question in my mind, Doug. You mentioned that your audiences are splintered. I think all of us are challenged in that way, and that you've got some that are following specifically on Twitter or that come to your website, and there may not be a lot of overlap between those two groups. Just curious, do you field specific polls to those specific audiences and then fine-tune content that you take back to that specific channel? So a poll of the Facebook audience and then developing content derived from that poll for that audience?
Well, we definitely frame the poll a little bit differently with each audience. So, through email, we will absolutely explain why we're doing the poll, what the results will be, where the results will be shared, and the information, so that we set expectations with people. On Facebook, it might be more of getting a dialogue going about the actual survey or poll, to start getting feedback right then and there, because through Facebook's interface, we have a tie-in directly to our audience. With Twitter, it might just be, we're trying to promote it a little bit more and get some links. If it's B2B related or business related, we're going to put it on LinkedIn, and same thing as Facebook, kind of solicit people's reactions. So I wouldn't say that we actually, right now, we don't adjust the design for each medium, but we definitely frame the conversation for each medium.
Okay, great. Well, I've got one more question from the audience that I'll pose, and I've got a couple housekeeping notes regarding how we're going to be making this content available to you, the audience, because we know it was a lot to digest, and your pens are probably smoking from taking notes. And so for the last question, and I think this is an important one because it's really about tying together your results with the efforts they generate. The question is, can you elaborate on the concepts of a landing page and tracking analytics and how you use them in the context of an internal website? So I think maybe put more broadly is, how do you measure all this stuff?
Well, and that's the key question. How do you measure all this stuff? So the tough way to measure it is just by putting your link back to your website and having everybody go to your link. You have no idea how people got there or what piece of content attracted them. So a landing page is typically a custom page that you built just to land those customers, and you might tailor the messaging specifically towards those. So if we distribute a press release, we won't just have our URL to our core domain on there. We'll actually create a landing page, and it might be, dkmedia.com/survey results. And this way we know that when we put the message out there and we get a reaction and those people come back, we can absolutely measure what the impact of putting that message out there is. So landing pages are a huge, huge tactical advantage nowadays for segmenting and measuring that traffic. And if you're putting stuff out on some of the new even social mediums out there now, they'll put out different links to different landing pages depending on your message, so that you can track back how many people came from LinkedIn, how many people came from Twitter, how many people came from Facebook, how many people came from press release distribution.
Okay.
And so it gives you that silo of measurement that you need.
Great. John, do you have anything to add to the whole how do you measure all this stuff?
Sure. Well, in terms of measurement, I mean, for us, our primary goal is to be seen as a thought leader, to be seen as a significant firm in markets and in practices like technology, where we want to be seen as significant among our clients and prospects. So, it may be a little too direct, can't draw a straight line, but we want to win more work. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when we did that California Water Resources survey, a key benchmark for us will be if we win several key projects that we're targeting in that state. We've been using the development as well as the conduct and release of that information to build some key relationships. So that's important to us. To Doug's point, maybe you have some content online. For us, a landing page, the way I like to think about landing pages is almost like a mini site or an online media kit, where we're consolidating information about topics that we really care about. And in fact, you can see some examples of those on our website at htb.com/point of view, or just navigate at the top to the point of view section of our site. And on the left-hand side, once you get there, you'll see things like departments of transportation, aviation, transit, and we link to not only our survey results, but also a lot of other white papers and content related to that work. So for us, results are really about building the relationships, and so those metrics are often dependent upon the feedback we get, and if other people are sharing, not just the media are sharing the news, but for example, some of our association partners, if they pick up that content and they're using it at their conferences and in their own e-newsletters, well, then we know we're having an impact.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I would just add one thing. Don't forget that there's campaign codes that you can do for all of major analytics packages. So when you distribute a link, you can actually track that back. And then URL shorteners are a huge, huge thing now. Using something like Bitly to shorten a URL with a campaign code on it will enable you to track that traffic directly back as well.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. So everybody who has listened in, thank you for your time today. We are recording this session, and the on-demand version is going to be available on both the Zoomerang and PR Newswire websites for you to listen to if you think you missed something. We're also putting the deck on SlideShare. SlideShare.net/PR Newswire is where you'll be able to find it. And finally, we'll be sending everyone an email with a link to these assets as well, so you won't lose track of all this information. Everyone, and in particular to our speakers, Doug and John, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it, and we'll see you back here sometime soon for another great webinar. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.